Hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday. Happy March. Thank you for joining us. Just letting people into the room. If you'll wait just a few moments. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, Teresa.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Morning.
Hello. Hello.
Can you be in the picture?
Hey, everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
Are we
Hello,
okay?
everybody.
Are we okay to record this?
Amylyx is actually recording this and we'll post it later this afternoon on our
Oh.
YouTube.
Thank you, because my sister can't get on. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you all for joining us on this Tuesday, the first day of March. We'll get started shortly. We're just going to allow some more people to join. We just opened up the room. So my name is Teresa. I am with Amylyx. A lot of you are already part of the revolution, but if you are not, we ask you to come and join us. We're patient-centric. We believe that people living with the disease and most impacted should be at the center of this revolution to end ALS, to put treatments in bodies, and to bring about cures. So happy that you're joining us today. We will be recording this. And we will post this on our YouTube channel shortly after this afternoon. We'll be in touch with everybody who registered to make sure that you get their recording and that it'll be available. As part of today, this is a community conversation. We encourage you to raise your hand or to participate and engage in the chat. We will make every effort to make sure that we are inclusive and making sure that the community is heard and that your voices and concerns are heard. And if they are not, we also have a mechanism to make sure that we can follow up and address what's happening. As a reminder, we are recording this. We encourage the chat. And for now, I'd like to hand this over to Dr. Megan Miller, our Director of Research and Policy.
Thank you, Teresa. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. As you know, we are here to talk about what is next for AMX0035, which is Amylyx Pharmaceuticals' novel therapeutic that has completed a phase 2 trial, is currently in phase 3 trials, and the company has submitted a new drug application to the FDA. So we are talking today about what that means, where they are in the process, and we are very lucky to have an expert in sort of FDA processes on the line with us, who I will call upon after a few introductory slides to walk us through sort of what the FDA is up to with regard to AMX. Go for it. Okay, so here's a quick overview of the agenda today. First, we'll do a quick background and overview of the AMX drug, which I'll just call AMX so I don't have to read out all the numbers. An overview of the FDA Advisory Committee meeting and process, which again, we will have support from Mimi Pappas, who is an expert in this area. And then finally, how you as the ALS community can support a successful review of the AMX drug. So a couple of things we will not cover today, but we know that there are always outstanding questions about many of these things. We will not talk about other investigational drugs or therapies that are currently under investigation for ALS, or other FDA-related actions or questions. We will not discuss actions or processes for those for drugs outside of the US or for people who are living outside of the US for how they can get involved in advocating for approval. Okay, so quick overview of AMX0035. It is also known as PB Turso because the actual drug name is sodium phenylbutyrate, or PB, and taurursodiol Turso. It is an orally administered drug, which is designed to slow disease progression by slowing or preventing neuron cell death. The phase 2 clinical trial was completed in 2020 by Amylyx Pharmaceuticals, and the primary endpoint was slowed functional decline on the ALS-FRS-R scale compared to placebo. They also measured several secondary endpoints, including biomarkers, muscle strength, lung vital capacity. The phase 2 trial had 137 participants. All were within 18 months of symptom onset, and they were randomized into groups with a 2-to-1 placebo or drug to placebo ratio. As I mentioned at the outset, the phase 3 trial, which is called Phoenix, is currently ongoing. So on the next slide, we have just kind of an overview. Oh, I'm sorry. First, we'll do key results. So after the phase 2 trial, there were 2 publications that were peer-reviewed and published in peer-reviewed journals. The first were the results of the top line and sort of the primary results of the trial, published in New England Journal of Medicine in September of 2020, and then there was a follow-up publication in October of 2020 about the long-term impacts on survival. So from these publications, we know that the AMX drug is safe. There were no major adverse effects associated with the drug. Any side effects that were reported were mostly gastrointestinal in nature. Most were early in administration and classified as mild. We also know that unlike any other drug that's been tested in ALS, AMX0035 met its primary endpoint. So it did show a significant slowing of progression on the ALS-FRS score. And then the follow-up publication showed that it does, in fact, through open label extension data, increase the long-term survival of people who received AMX0035 compared to those who originally received placebo and then were switched to the drug of 6.5 months. Okay, so as I mentioned, those data were published in 2020, toward the end of 2020, when after the phase 2 trial was complete. Since then, a few things have happened. So in October of that same year, IMALS, in collaboration with ALS Association, released a petition that got, I think, 50,000 or more signatures, calling on Amylyx and the FDA to work together to move AMX0035 through the regulatory process. In April, the FDA indicated to Amylyx that they were willing to review a new drug application, and Amylyx has since had a pre-NDA meeting with them and then submitted, in fact, the new drug application, or NDA. In December of last year, we learned that the FDA granted priority review of this drug, which was welcome news for the community. And that brings us to present day, when we learned just a couple of weeks ago that that the FDA intends to have an advisory committee meeting, which includes an open public hearing, and that's what we're going to hear more about today. We also have the final decision deadline date from the FDA of June 29th, 2022.
Is it
Okay,
possible to ask a question?
Yeah, please.
Can you tell me if the people in the trial had specific genetic issues with ALS, or were they all sporadic without genetic issues? And is this drug specifically targeted toward any particular, known caused onset of ALS?
But it is not targeted toward any specific onset or known genetic variant. For your question about the variant, like the participants in the trial, I would have to go back to the paper. I'm sure that information is available. My guess is that there is a mix of people who have a known genetic variant and those who don't, but I don't actually know that. I'd be happy to go back to the paper and let you know.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Okay, so what is the AdCom or Advisory Committee? Shorthand is AdCom. This is a mechanism that FDA sometimes uses when it's making decisions on on the approval of a drug or a biologic. It is not something that is used every time, and this is the first, to our knowledge, that is being used in the ALS field. So new to some of us, which is why we have here, we are welcoming today Mimi Papas, who is a consultant from 3D Communications, who is supporting Amylyx in navigating this process and has graciously agreed to join us today to help us and you all understand better what the process looks like, where there may be opportunities for us to participate, and then just an overall kind of timeline and expectations of what will happen after that, during and after the AdCom. So without further ado, I think the next slide is Mimi's.
Okay, thank you, Megan. And thanks to all of you joining us on this Zoom call here, especially though thanks to the IMALS team for inviting me to join the conversation. Just wanted to check, is everyone able to hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Good. I always love it when that happens. All right, so like Megan said, my name is Mimi. My company, I work for 3D Communications. We're a niche communications firm, and our specialty is that we help pharmaceutical companies and medical device companies navigate the FDA regulatory process. My particular area of focus is helping stakeholders understand the opportunities FDA offers for public participation in this process. You know, it can be a little bit different than some other types of public comment. So I really appreciate your time today and letting me walk us through this a little bit. All right, so on this slide, thank you, Emily. On this slide, let's start from the beginning. What is an FDA Advisory Committee? Some of you may already know, but these are standing panels of outside experts. They're independent. They are not employees of the FDA, and they provide advice and guidance to the agency on scientific, technical, and policy matters. And the reason they're experts is because they're physicians, they're researchers, they're clinicians, statisticians. I think every panel has at least one biostatistician, patients and consumer representatives, and there's also an industry representative on these panels. FDA has about 50 of them in place. They're separated by FDA center. So you've got panels under drugs, medical devices, biologics and vaccines, even veterinary drugs and food. Every center has its own advisory committees. And these panels are organized by general subject, not specific topics. So for example, the March 30th meeting is going to be held by the Peripheral and Central Nervous System Drugs Advisory Committee, which has members with varying types of expertise from general neurology, biostats, epidemiology. Not everyone on the panel is going to come to the meeting with particular expertise in ALS, for example. Like I said, the purpose of these committees is to provide recommendations to FDA and also to often answer the specific questions that FDA asks, that FDA wants expert guidance on. The committees may be asked to vote on these questions. And while all of this is really important to FDA, the committee recommendations, the votes, the discussions during the day, the ultimate decisions are made by FDA and not at the committee meeting itself. So final determinations, like Megan said, are scheduled for June. So they happen weeks or months after the meeting. So with that background on advisory committees generally, let's talk a little bit about some features of advisory committee meetings on the next slide. So they're all announced in the Federal Register, which is the daily publication of the federal government. I may be one of the only people on the planet who does look at it daily. The purpose is they want to alert the public about the meeting and to let the public know specifically how they can participate. The Federal Register includes all the directions for participation. And that's because most of these advisory committee meetings are entirely open to the public. Anyone can observe these meetings. No registration is required to observe the meetings. Even more so now that the meetings are held virtually, they're even, I think, more accessible to folks. Before, folks had to travel to Maryland to watch them in person. And now they're webcast live. And all we in the public need is internet to watch them. They're often telecast even on a live YouTube channel. So they're pretty accessible. They're all posted and archived on FDA's website, fda.gov. So there is a lot of transparency there regarding these advisory committee meetings. And further, like I said, the discussions that the panel has, their votes when they're asked to vote, all of this is open to the public. And for transparency's sake, advisors are also asked to provide the rationale behind their votes. Again, all open to the public. Really important to this conversation that we're having here together today, though, is that every advisory committee meeting has two opportunities for public participation. The first is through written letters. These are letters that are reviewed by the panel members in advance of the meeting. The second is through spoken testimony that's delivered during the meeting itself. Both types of public participation are entirely voluntary and do become part of the public record for the meeting. And just an aside, the audience at FDA advisory committee meetings is actually the advisory committee members themselves and not FDA. And that's one of those distinctions I had mentioned earlier. So let's look at AdComs and how they're conducted. On the next slide, I have an example of the last agenda for the Peripheral and Central Nervous System Drugs Advisory Committee. And Emily, there we one backwards one, if you don't mind. So it was held virtually in thank you. It was held virtually in 2020, and while the specifics and the time breaks may change meeting to meeting, I think this agenda gives a good overview of the general activities in every meeting. FDA calls these meetings to order, introduces its committee members, makes some introductory remarks, and then the agency staff turn the meeting over to the committee to run the rest of this scientific meeting. It's in the committee's hands. Like I said, the committee is the audience. So first up is the sponsor or the drug company and its data presentation. The company will then take questions from the advisors. Next, it's FDA's turn. FDA staff will give a data presentation of its own, and then they will take questions from their advisors. After lunch is a section called the open public hearing. So on the next slide, you can see that the open public hearing is also called the OPH for short. So I may interchange them a little bit. They're both the same, open public hearing and OPH. It's a 1-hour session set aside for stakeholders to provide their live spoken relevant testimony to the advisors. It comes at a really important time of the day as well. Immediately following the OPH, the open public hearing, is the committee discussion. FDA may give its advisors a series of discussion questions it wants feedback on. And many times, like I said, FDA may ask the committees to vote on particular questions. And those questions are posted typically about 2 days before the meeting online on FDA's website. If there is a vote, it's right before adjournment. And like I said, it would be, it too would be public. The whole day is public. All right. So that's the overview. Let's focus a little bit on the public participation aspects. So first, like I said, is the possibility for writing letters to submit to FDA. So these written submissions, these written letters are all posted on regulations.gov. On the next slide, you can see a kind of my screen grab of the site and the little comment button up to the left. They're all posted on regulations.gov, and it's a pretty accessible way, I feel, to share a point of view with FDA's advisors directly. What to know about these written submissions? On the next slide, first and foremost, they become part of the public record, and all these submissions are reviewed by FDA staff. The letters that are submitted by the advisor deadline, and that's in our case, that's March 16th. Those letters will also go to the advisors in advance of the meeting. So the advisors will read those letters even before that meeting begins. And it's important to know anyone who wishes to submit a letter can. Just a little comment, you can submit attachments, documents, and PDFs, that sort of thing, but there's no opportunity to submit video through this, through regulations.gov. FDA does ask that writers disclose if they have any relevant financial relationships to a drug company, to its product, or its competitors, if known, in their submissions. And they're also asked if there are none of these financial relationships, that folks also disclose that as well. And one last thing that I think is important, FDA places emphasis on kind of original submissions rather than form letters. I was looking on regulations.gov the other day, and this comment in their commenters checklist struck me. It says a single well-supported comment may carry more weight than 1,000 form letters. And I thought it was an important note to make. All right, so those are the letters. Let's talk a little bit about the spoken testimony, the second way that folks can participate in the open public hearing. And it's obviously it's a visible way for members of the community to participate in the meeting. So a few things to note, especially in the virtual world now. Pre-registration to speak is absolutely required. When requesting to speak, FDA asks members of the public to share a brief statement of the nature of evidence they want to present. And this is to ensure FDA that the speakers that do testify are addressing issues that are relevant to the meeting. Not surprisingly, if you recall from the previous slide, the open public hearing is scheduled for an hour, so not surprisingly, the number of speakers and the time each speaker is granted can be limited. And FDA in that Federal Register notice says that people, if more people request to speak, then can be reasonably accommodated during the open public hearing, that FDA could use a lottery system to randomly select speakers. You know, and my personal experience is that FDA may limit the amount of time people have to speak. So a good expectation, although it's a fairly large range here, is that speakers get between 2 and 5 minutes to share their views. And at the meeting, FDA will time them. So speakers who run longer than the allotted time do get cut off and have their phones turned off. So another thing, yes. Another thing to remember is that speakers during the open public hearing must be available to speak live during the hearing itself. No pre-recording is possible. The one on March 30th is currently scheduled from 1:30 to 2:30 Eastern. But those times can shift a little. FDA's committees always try to really respect that agenda, but sometimes those timelines can change a little bit. For today's virtual meetings, speakers provide their testimony on the telephone. They're called by an automated line and given prompts to follow. And that line is automatically disconnected as soon as they complete their testimony. So the upshot of that is that there's been no opportunity for any sort of Q&A with open public hearing speakers as a result. It is on the phone, spoken only, no video, and no internet service is needed to participate. Like I said, it's just the telephone. And as was the case with the written letters, FDA does request that speakers disclose any relevant financial relationships they may have with the drug company, the product, or if known direct competitors. And likewise, if they do not have those types of financial relationships, FDA would encourages people to disclose that as well. And that, I know I just talked a lot at you, but that brings me to the end of kind of some process issues there. So I'm gonna pause on the next slide. It has my contact information. I welcome any follow-up questions, but I'll pause there for questions now. Please do, though, feel free to write down my number or my email as well if you have something that occurs to you later as well. Any questions on the regulatory process?
Yeah, hi, this is Gwen Peterson. Sorry, I'm not on camera. Hi, Mimi. Nice to meet you.
Good to meet you.
Hoping you could restate that little nugget or fact you gave around, 1,000 written letters is the equivalent to one speaker. Can you run that by us again?
Sure. It struck me, which is why I wanted to put it in there. FDA values public comment. They want to hear individual perspectives, and I think it is. And I please understand, I don't work for FDA, so I feel a little uncomfortable speaking on their behalf. But just my personal observations, if there is a first-person individualized perspective that is shared, it just has more impact than having, like in this case, 1,000 form letters. Think about it this way: the advisors volunteer to be on these panels, and they are given hundreds of dense scientific pieces of information to review in order to be prepared for these meetings. And 1,000 letters, if they're all the same and they're templated, my assumption is they're just there's no kind of concentrated review of them, that folks are gonna just kind of skim through them. So definitely the first person voice, authentic, individualized letters have impact. I've seen advisors quote from them in the past. They do have impact.
One point of clarification there, Mimi. I think what you're saying, though, that like an individualized letter is also impactful. It doesn't have to be the in-person statement.
Correct.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
Was that what you were asking, Gwen? The difference between like an oral and a written letter?
And furthermore, I'm wondering what the best use of advocates' time is, and where we should focus our efforts if form letters, they're not really in the spotlight or forefront. If we can get more time for speakers, or again, I'm just trying to maximize on everyone's time. Thank you.
Yeah, Gwen, we will get to that shortly. Megan did want to share a little bit more about IMALS and the strategy that we have here, but we did want to make sure if the community has any questions specifically for Mimi, who has been hired and been through the FDA approval process before, we wanted to make sure that the community is able to ask any specific questions to her, either now in the chat, or if you want to take down her contact and follow up. She is the most knowledgeable person on that.
One question from the chat that might we might get some insight on from Mimi is from Janet, who said, would it be helpful for people presently taking AMX off label to submit their experiences, or should it be focused on people who were in the trial?
Yeah, if you have experience and you're inclined to share it, I think it could be valuable. Yes. I'm sorry, Janet, that I missed your question. I wasn't even looking at the chat. Forgive me.
Okay, so I am seeing some questions in the chat. I think, Teresa, are we gonna take questions now, or should we power through the other couple slides and then do them all again?
Yeah, I think that continue to read the chat for the whole community and to engage there. I just did want to note that the purpose of this specific event is to talk about Amylyx in the FDA process. There's nobody full staff from Amylyx here that's going to be able to talk specifically to people being in the trials or being able to speak specifically to the EAP. That's not what this event is for. This event is specifically to talk through the FDA process and what Amylyx is currently in and how the community might be able to get involved. So I just wanted to refocus us there. But yes, please do continue to submit in the chat and we will get to reading out some of it shortly. We wanted to share with the community a little bit from an IMALS perspective and then definitely come back to the chat, Megan.
Thank you. Okay. So Emily, next slide, please. So, okay, thank you. Okay, so back to IMALS's strategy or approach to engaging in this process. I think our big goal is to rally a powerful and united community in support of the science behind AMX0035, and namely to emphasize that the data support AMX being safe and effective, and the data support immediate approval of AMX0035. And also highlighting the lived experiences of those living with ALS and the critical unmet need in the community. So I just thought I'd break down a little bit more the two opportunities that Mimi already highlighted for us. The first is the written submission. As Mimi already mentioned, these submissions are due March 16th, and that individualized written letters are more impactful than a form letter. So we will not, as IMALS, be creating a template or anything that people can fill out because we don't feel that that is going to be the most impactful. But we do encourage everyone who is so inclined to go ahead and submit a written letter of support for AMX0035. A couple of tips, pro tips, which we've gleaned from our interactions with Mimi and other knowledge of the FDA, we encourage you to focus on the data from the Centaur trial. I'd be happy to put the data or the publications in the chat when I'm done speaking so that you can have them easily accessible. I think that the advisory committee is really focused on data, so highlighting the top line results there. The effect that the AMX drug has had on you or your family, or if you're a clinician, the patients that you serve, and how AMX0035 could change the lives of those most impacted by ALS. So those living with the disease or those caring for people with ALS. It is advised that you not focus on other drugs that FDA may be reviewing, since this advisory committee is only focused on AMX0035, or other challenges or limitations with FDA policies or procedures. So this forum is specifically for review of this drug. It is not something that FDA will probably look to as it considers its operations moving forward. Oh, and just one more note on that is that we, Amylyx, in collaboration with all of you and the community more broadly, is working on developing a few additional key messages that we think are important to share with the FDA. And there will be an opportunity for you to weigh in on that later as well. So next slide. Okay, then the other opportunity is the oral testimony. So again, you have to submit your interest in providing oral testimony, and the space will be limited since there is only 1 hour currently for the open public hearing. So we are in the process of we are committed to making sure that all of the key messages are delivered to the AdCom. And are actively coordinating with key stakeholders to try to make sure that those who can deliver the messages, most effectively are submitting their interest in participating in the open public hearing. So if you are interested in doing that, please just feel free to reach out to me directly, and we can have a conversation. Again, space is limited here, and we think that that those who have direct experience with AMX maybe will have the most, will have the most impact in providing oral testimony. So we'd like to ensure that as many of those folks as possible can participate. If you were not in the trial, or if you don't have direct experience with AMX, you are still welcome to provide oral testimony, but we encourage you to first think about providing written testimony. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so I think this is the final slide, which is essentially just, again, we're going to work on trying to craft some key messages, but here are the top line messages that we think will be effective with the FDA. So one, that according to the peer-reviewed publications and the trial data, AMX0035 is both safe and effective. There is a critical unmet need in ALS. And then I think that this community in particular can be most effective in letting the FDA know and the advisory committee know what it is like to live with ALS, or what it's like to care for someone living with ALS, and how the improvements observed in the trial might actually impact your day-to-day life. So these are the things that this community is uniquely qualified to obviously contribute, and so we're really hoping that we can mobilize as many people as possible to let the FDA know what this drug would mean for them. Okay, so one last slide. In addition to the actions with specifically the FDA and the AdCom, 2 additional opportunities directly with IMALS. So one is to tell us what you think. So if you have questions from today's convo, please send them our way, or if you have input about or ideas or thoughts on what you think the community should be telling the FDA about AMX0035, please share them with us by the end of this week. I think Teresa might have just put it in the chat. Yes, okay. So there's a form there. So feel free to put your questions in there if we don't get to them today, or and then any feedback on or input on what we should be communicating to the FDA, also welcome. And then of course we're going to have a viewing party on March 30th, which is the day of the AdCom and the open public hearing. So that will be forthcoming. Sign up for that will be forthcoming. And I think that's it. Yes. Okay, so maybe we can stop sharing and go to the chat.
How does this affect the submission for the EAP?
So I don't think that this is related to the EAP. I know that Amylyx is still working on it. We don't have it. To our knowledge, they haven't released anything publicly about their plans for the EAP, though they've promised that they will certainly let us know. So I know it's something they're working on. Unfortunately, I don't have additional information there. Teresa, are there questions from earlier that we should address before I get to these ones in the bottom?
Yes, so I believe we had started at Janet. Would it be helpful for people presently taking AMX? We addressed that with Mimi. There was another one to ask, will Brian and Sandra address the committee?
So we, again, in the end, it's going to be up to the FDA. So we'll see, we can submit a request for Brian and Sandra to address the committee. And it depends on how much interest they get and whether or not they go to a lottery system. So to be determined, though we as IMALS will request a speaking position from someone in the community.
MMC, who I believe is Kathy, had said, is it safe to say that those of us who have no firsthand experience with AMX0035 can still make impactful statements regarding the data and the unmet need? She goes on to say, DMD parents had a wonderfully coordinated set of oral speakers at their AdCom. I hope IMALS can help coordinate something as powerful for ALS. Megan, would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, so my response is yes, absolutely. You can absolutely still make an impactful statement regarding the data and the unmet need, and also sort of like what the day-to-day, how meaningful the observed changes with AMX would be in the life of somebody living with ALS or a caregiver. I will turn to Mimi to add to that. I don't think it has to be somebody who is in the trial to be impactful. I think what my point earlier about the open public hearing is that we do want to make sure that we have plenty of representation from people who were in the trial and did experience it, but I don't think it needs to be excluded to that.
Right, and just to add on to the second part, the DMD experience also is just a little bit different as well. I believe FDA extended that open public hearing. There were over 50 speakers, so I think it's also just a slightly different. We're still looking at potentially a 1-hour open public hearing.
And hi, everyone. I'm Laura. As many of you know, I joined IMALS in the ALS community about 2 months ago now from the Duchenne muscular dystrophy world. And that AdCom that's been referenced is one of the very important and incredible community things that we did early on in my time in DMD. And so I just wanted to speak to that question as well. I think absolutely it is important, especially via the written testimony opportunity where truly there is no limit, and everything that the panel can hear from people who have seen firsthand the difference that AMX0035 has made in their lives, in the lives of somebody that they love and know, why it is that the difference that AMX0035 could make in their life, even if they were not able to participate in the trial, but it would be able to take it with approval, and the meaningful difference that that makes on the ALS timeline is something that the FDA and the panel in particular, which will be considering these in advance as long as they're submitted by March 16th, is really important, and a chance for us to just show a powerful way of how our community supports this and how that support is grounded in what it is that we have learned through these rigorous clinical trials, and what is supported by the science. And I think that also that was something that was really powerful as part of the DMD experience. I think that we had a lot of people that wanted to speak at the open public hearing, but recognizing there was limited space, there was a big effort to make sure that these written testimonies got supported as well. And then back to the open public hearing portion, we were just really thoughtful, recognizing that there are a lot of powerful voices out there, and important points to be made as the panel's considering the data and the presentations from the FDA and from the sponsor. There's a big opportunity just to make sure that we were working together to make sure that the most important messages were spoken to in a powerful way, so that the FDA panel of advisors knew that the support was coming and grounded in a true understanding of the impact that this drug has, the data behind it, and the critical unmet need, and that all supports the review, and the message that we wanted to make sure that they heard. So absolutely, the written testimonies are valuable, and really something where as many people as we can rally to support to do that will be incredible. And then meanwhile, we're trying to make sure that we're just very thoughtful about making sure that we represent and work with the other community members to get the messages in front of the panel that we know they need to hear from the community, voicing our support for the review of this drug.
There's another question about the link for registration at the March 30th meeting from Kamal. Mimi had posted the link earlier, and we will post it again for the link to the meeting. We also at IMLS will be hosting a watch party, so we can all watch it together as a community. But in the chat, here is the link for the meeting. Do we know if FDA does any screening of speakers, or if it is just a lottery for all comers?
So hi, this is Mimi. I'll just jump in there. So the only screening that FDA does is that brief statement of the nature of evidence somebody wants to present. That's FDA's way of knowing if the person wants to address something that's really pertinent to the meeting at hand, and not, a general statement. That's the only screening that happens. If it goes to lottery, everybody who has something relevant is put into that lottery, and it's a random selection. I've asked FDA staff in the past just to confirm that it is in fact random, and it is.
I'll add to that, Mimi, that the initial submission of interest doesn't have to be, as we learned from you yesterday, doesn't have to be anything expansive, but
Right.
could be
Great.
a sentence or two that says, I would like to speak about, how the improvements seen in the trial would impact my family, or something like that. So it just has to be relevant. It doesn't have to be extensive.
Exactly. Literally one sentence is sufficient.
Okay, any other questions related to AMX or the AdCom?
Okay, just to reiterate, we are recording this. We will post this later on our YouTube for those who couldn't attend. We also will follow up with everyone who registered for this event with a link to the recording. We, again, will have key messages that we feel that the FDA should hear at the AdCom that we'll be sharing on Friday. But in the meantime, we'd like to hear if you had any questions that were not addressed here, or if you have any key messages you feel that we should be bubbling up. I again will put the link for that right here in the chat. And we just want to make sure that you guys are leaving understanding the process that Amylyx is currently in, what the AdCom is, how the day looks, and our current strategy is that the community as a whole should submit written submissions, and that a few key people directly impacted, we should save that space for the oral presentations.
Yeah, can I ask if anybody here on the call has been taking the drug and they experiences thoughts on that? They could share to the group.
I think because this is recorded, we should reserve that, because that would, we want to make sure that there's privacy for people who would like to reserve that.
Understood and respected. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you all for joining. We are here. Again, the link is in there if you'd like to submit anything further, if you have some questions you'd like to immediately follow up with. And then please know that your emails will be blowing up soon with more information from us as we start to put a lot of the strategy in place for this, understanding this is vital for the community.
Teresa, I think somebody did have a question. Heal is the name that I'm seeing.
I don't know why it comes up like that. My name is Debbie. I had sent in a question. What is considered moving forward fast? Because to me, I'm sorry, this is still taking a long time. I mean, it started the end of July, and here we are, the 1st of March.
So I guess adding to that is, okay, if we had the meeting the end of March and the deadline of the approval by the end of June, what does that mean for possible availability to us struggling with ALS every day? To Debbie's point, all the bureaucrats, a lot of wasted time for a lot of our lives.
I thought that the FDA was told to move it forward faster. 7 and 8 months is not fast when you're sitting in this place.
Yeah, thank you. We hear that. I think turning it into something action oriented, it's one of the challenges we have foreseen with this particular drug is that the data are from a phase 2 trial, which is typically not considered for an NDA. And so, but the data are solid here, and we want to do everything we can to convince the FDA to review and approve now versus after the phase 3 trial is completed and submitted, because that would then add even more time. And again, I think emphasizing, I mean, the lived experience, what it's like for people living with ALS, and what, you know, an extension of life of, you know, potentially 6.5 months would mean for you and for your families. So I think really emphasizing the strength of the data at this point, and the lack of any sort of safety concerns is something that we will be pushing really hard on.
I just think it's a shame that other countries approve it, but not the US.
I haven't yet.
So I guess going back to my question, if we get the FDA approval, what is kind of a usual timeline before it becomes available?
That's a good question. Mimi, do you have any thoughts there? No.
The silence means nobody has any idea.
Not to put anyone on the spot, but Laura and Kathy, I know you've been through this a few times, so if you have any thoughts or.
You have to go back to Amylyx and see, you know, if they identify a company. Amylyx is a virtual company, for what I'm reading. So they have to identify someone who's going to be making the product for them, which means now that once they identify it, then FDA has to get involved again to approve it. So it depends where Amylyx is in this process to even find a manufacturer. Then also, if you look at the dosing in the protocols, you're talking about 1 gram of the one ingredient, 3 grams of the other. That means you're gonna have to swallow 4 grams of tablets, or you could put it into a liquid. So it's not just the FDA now. You got to look at the whole process. How they're going to bring this thing up to manufacture, and if they're already in that. I mean, Amylyx is a 35 people company. This is just from reading online. So and I do have some experience with pharma companies. So it all depends on what it is. And I'm experiencing, my wife. And then my joke is that the company that's in my life is probably going to kill me. But everybody just drags their feet on this. And if you look at the recent approval process, where the bill was just passed, and that between FDA approving and NIH approving, I mean, you have a timeline that's going to be probably a year to get anything through the approval process. So, but to answer the direct question, no one here knows what Amylyx did or how ready they are to bring this stuff to market. And then the other part we don't know, which I've been trying to research, what are they going to charge for it? And did Medicare or your insurance companies approve it? So we're just looking at the one process. So my frustration is we'd like to give this to my wife. So that's where I have a personal interest in it. I'm thinking to how this thing works. So yeah, you people are all right. There are obstacles that are insurmountable. My direct question, I guess, would be to Laura is, I mean, we're talking about individual people filing on at FDA, or do we have, does these groups have lobbyists? Do they have, people that help move this thing through? I mean, because everything involves money. And, there's the science part and there's the money part. And we'd like to look more towards the science part on how to help the people. So it's not just a simple obstacle. I mean, I look at the people on the screen here and I'm saying, how many people have even experienced taking this AMX0035 with derivative? Probably very few. I mean, it's cost prohibitive. I mean, when you speak to people and say, well, do you want to compound it? Well, the first question comes back, well, this is what it costs. Can you afford it? So, I mean, I don't know between the associations out there, but I'm new to this game. I'm only in this for a few months now with my wife. But, you scratch your head to a lot of things. The associations and the organizations I'm finding to be helpful, but to answer your question, there's a lot of moving parts. I'm not convinced that these wheels are connected and the gears are engaged all together.
I think that those are really incredibly important points, and I'm so glad you asked them because we're here talking specifically about the AdCom, which is an incredible and very important point for us to make sure that we use the avenues open to ensure this AdCom panel understands the community support, importance, and need to take advantage of this opportunity, even at this early point, to apply flexibility in light of rigorous science and data to help people access this drug that can make a difference in their lives that is needed now, not 2 years from now, not 1 year from now. Alongside that, though, it's so important to remember that it's not just one part of a process. It's something that where there are a number of things that need to move with the FDA, with the company. We have further this incredibly important question of reimbursement and how that supports action. And all of this comes back to why it is that we as an organization and as a community need to be thinking about all of these things and what are the tools and the things that we need to develop to make sure that we develop good drugs as quickly as possible and have great ways to measure just the level of impact and convince insurance companies to provide reasonable levels of reimbursement so that people can actually use the drugs and get access to them. So I think some of these are questions that we will be following up on with Amylyx and hoping that we can ensure there's quality information provided to the community. There's more that we need to and will be doing on top of just the FDA Advisory Committee meeting. This is an incredibly important moment that we are focused on right now and really want to make sure that we get right, because this is an uncommon opportunity to say this is phase 2 data where we have the chance to act, and we want to make sure that that's taken best advantage of. But there is more to it, and I really appreciate you being sensitive to that, and we are too.
Yeah, I think
thank you all for very much for your time and attention on this today.
Adding one quick thing to that, to the point about pricing, is that the ICER is reviewing this drug currently. I'm putting a link in the chat. ICER is Institute for Clinical and Economic Review, who reviews drugs for their value, essentially, and makes recommendations on cost and pricing. And so there are also opportunities for the community to engage with them in the process.
Okay, I know that we are a little over time. We really appreciate everyone joining. Again, this is recorded. We will post it later this afternoon. Thank you for all that registered. We will be back in touch in email sharing the link, as well as some key messages and points of how we at IMALS plan to move forward here in this process, and understand that it's one step in a larger path of all that we need to do to make sure that we're revolutionizing how this disease impacts us. But in the meantime, happy Tuesday, happy March. Thank you for being in this revolution with us, for changing the world so that it's better for all of us. We appreciate you coming out today. So long.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.